Hello, this is Yvonne. Welcome to video 2 of the Double Wedding Ring series using templates. In this video lesson, I will be showing you how to make footballs for your table runner. In order to make these, you will need 2 arcs and 1 inner arc, which are labeled on the template. In the last lesson, we learned how to make 1 complete arc. Now, before you proceed with joining an arc and making a football, you'll have to check that that left piece and that right piece that we sewed on the ends of our arcs are facing the correct direction. Remember, you have arc wedges in the middle, and then you have those 2 pieces on the outside, which are the left and the right piece that have those sharp angles that point outward. This is important because this will help you to join your piece with that inside arc, which is what you sew next to it. Once you've made those complete arcs, then you're going to want to sew 1 inner arc to a single arc. You always sew with all of the seams going in one direction, and you sew from the left to the right with those seams downward to ensure that you can ease all of the curve into that inner arc piece. You simply pat it down, and you do not press it, but you can run your finger along the seam, and that'll help that piece to lay flat. Do not iron. You're going to put something heavy on top, and you're going to set it aside while you sew that second arc that we're going to add to this piece to make a football. Find an arc that you like that looks pretty against that first arc that you sewed to that inner arc, and then you will need to find 2 coordinating 2.5-inch squares to sew on either side. In my case, I've decided to use some solids. I found beautiful solids that coordinated with my arcs, and I think that will definitely show off all those beautiful florals. I'm using a 2.5-inch Creative Grids square, and I'm just cutting a couple of colors for each side of my arc that are the same color. I think in this case I will use the yellows, and I will set that red one aside and use it on another football. But I will use 2 of these yellow squares on either end of that second complete arc in order to proceed to the next step of building my football. I'm going to take those 2 2.5-inch squares, and I'm going to sew them on either side of that arc. Only one of my arcs will have the squares, the other one is plain. Once I've added those squares to either side, I will gently do the same thing and finger press it, not using an iron, as to not stretch and distort my block, and then I will check it from the back to make sure that all of my seams are facing in one direction, which makes these easier to sew. So there you have it. That is 1 completed arc with my 2 squares. Now for pinning. In order to sew these 2 pieces together, it's important to always pin. I always start from the middle of my block, knowing which direction I'm going to sew, and I'm going to pin starting in the middle. So fold your block in half, making sure that you find the center of that inner arc, and you find the center of that outer arc. And once you have that, you can begin pinning. I always handle these very gently because there's a lot of bias on these edges. So once you find that center, go ahead and put your first pin in the middle, and then you can pin carefully in either direction, either to the left or to the right. I always carefully lay those pieces of fabric together, and I pin at each intersection so that those seams will lay nice and flat when I get ready to sew. So working from the center to the outside, you are pinning carefully at each one of those intersections. If you have an accurate 1/4 inch seam, your pieces should match perfectly when you get to this outer corner. Again, pin those with the seams going in one direction, and then carefully match your pieces until you reach the end of each side of your block. If you have an accurate 1/4 inch seam and those templates were cut out correctly, then those should match perfectly. Carefully manipulate your fabric, being careful not to stretch it. I cannot emphasize this enough. You have to carefully handle your fabric so that you're not stretching it, because we're working with strictly biases along both pieces, which makes them very wonky and they can get stretched out in a hurry. Continue pinning all the way to the end of that block. And this is the direction that I'm going to sew. So I'm making sure that all of my pieces fit and that I've pinned completely before I begin sewing. I check to make sure that all of my pieces, the edges match, and then I carefully rotate that last piece so that it matches with my end, adding one more pin before I take this over to the sewing machine and sew it. I will sew each one of these pieces from the left, going all the way to the right to ensure that my seams lay nice and flat and that my block lays perfectly flat when I'm done sewing. Now, I've sewn my block. I'm going to carefully check to make sure I have a nice accurate 1/4 inch seam all the way around. And then I'm going to open this block and I have one completed football. I always take my fingers and I run across the seams to help them lay flat. But I will not be using an iron because an iron tends to distort these pieces and I want them to match perfectly with all of the other pieces I'm going to add. You can put something heavy on top and set them aside, and then you continue making your footballs. You will need a total of 10 of these pieces in order to make your table runner. Please let me know if you have any questions regarding any of the steps I covered in this lesson. Remember, this is video 2. Don't forget to add your questions and your comments below. And remember to like and subscribe our channel so that you can get the latest videos. Have an awesome day. I'll see you later. The Jelly Roll Club, always free and always fun.